Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is seem. Let's take a moment to review some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you are likely to see or hear the verb seem used is to mean to give the impression of being something or having a particular quality. Let me give you an example to help sort of understand this first definition, right? And I want you to imagine I see someone and the person is crying, right? You might say, "Oh my, you seem sad. You are giving me the impression you're sad because I see you crying." Right? And we could do this with a variety of feelings and emotions and sort of the nonverbal clues that people that give us these impressions. Now, a second way you might hear or see the verb seem used is to mean to be unable to do something despite having tried. Okay. Now, when I think of this second definition, uh, I think of the phrase, I can't seem to remember, right? So I'm using the modal can't with my verb seem here in this example. I'm unable to remember is what I'm trying to convey with a sentence like that. So I know I think and I believe I say this sometimes as I'm looking for car keys or I'm trying to remember a particular date or detail and I'm communicating with my family or my friends. I can't seem to remember. So I've been unable to do something despite trying. Now, a third way you might see or hear seem used is to mean to suggest something is true in a cautious or polite way. Now, this third definition, I would say, kind of connects to the first one. So, again, many times we're using these nonverbal clues. Um, but imagine maybe you walk into a particular business and you just see kind of an angry person. They're don't seem to want to interact with a customer, right? We might say, "Oh, it seems like a bad time," right? Or maybe you've had that moment with a coworker where you plan to go ask a question and you can tell, like, "Oh, um, this doesn't seem like a great time to have a conversation or for me to ask my question. I'm going to come back later." So I'm saying it seems like a bad time, again, to be rather polite and sort of excuse myself. Now you should know that seem is a regular verb, and most of the time in my videos, the next thing I tell you is about how to make the progressive form, right? We talk about adding ing. And you'll see on my screen and my notes here, I haven't done that today. And that's because seem is what's considered a stative or a non-action verb. So generally, I would caution my students and tell them I would avoid using seem in any progressive or continuous verb tenses, whether it's present, past, or future. I would again generally avoid doing this. But we can add ed to this verb to form the past tense and participle for this as well. And to work on a little bit of pronunciation, our base verb here, seem, ends in a voiced M sound. And this means that the ed ending is just going to make a D sound when I say it. I am not adding an extra syllable as I say it. So it should sound like this, seemed, seemed. Okay. Now, there aren't any phrasal verbs we need to study today, so instead, we can do some verb tense practice. And today I thought we would practice the past perfect and the simple present. Let's start with the past perfect. We use this verb tense many times to note that a particular action has occurred before a certain point in time or before another action. To make past perfect sentences, I'm going to need two parts to my verb. I'm going to need the past form of have, which is had, and then I need my participle form of the verb. So in the affirmative, I'm going to have my subject, I'll have had, and then the participle. You can see that in my example. He had seemed happy in the days before his disappearance. Okay? So the type of sentence you might hear in sort of a mystery, or perhaps a newspaper report about someone whose whereabouts are unknown. But here we're talking about people's impression, right? Maybe he didn't seem sad, he didn't seem upset, etc. Now, if I want to make a negative past perfect sentence, I'm going to start with my subject, then I'll use had not, and then the participle. Or another option would be to use the contraction hadn't, and then the participle. Here's my example sentence. The warnings hadn't seemed to be taken seriously. Okay? So um, this might tie back to our second definition of trying. Kind of our perception here again is that people didn't listen, didn't follow them. Finally, let's talk about yes or no questions in the past perfect. To do this, I start with had, then I have my subject, and then the participle form, the verb. Here's another example. Had the record seemed to be unbreakable. Okay? Again, this many times ties back to kind of our perception, our thoughts, our impression. Now, let's talk about the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about our habits and routines. We also use it to discuss our facts and feelings. And the trick with the simple present is that we've got to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, I'm just going to use the base verb. So no special endings on the end of that verb. But if my subject is he, she, or it, I need to add an S to the end of the verb. You can see that in my example. It seems they couldn't solve the puzzle. Okay? So this would be an example where we're talking about someone trying to do something but not succeeding. So that's that's what that sentence means there. And because it, right, is my subject, you can see the S on the end of the verb there. Now, if I want to make a simple present sentence, again, I pay attention to my subject. My subject is I, you, we, or they. I use do, not, and then the base verb. If my subject is he, she, or it, I use does not, and then the base verb. You might also hear the contractions don't and doesn't. An example of a negative simple present sentence might be, you don't seem yourself, right? So something seems off. The impression I'm getting is something's not quite right, okay? Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, I start with do or does, whichever form matches of my subject, and that subject comes next. Then I use the base verb. Again, no special endings here. I always like to point out to my students, notice I'm not adding an S to the end of the verb in the negative or my yes or no question. I'm only doing that in the affirmative. Let's take a look at the last example here. Does it seem like we've been lied to? Right? There's a question that might tie back to our third definition as being sort of a polite way to ask, or a cautious way to suggest something is the case, or to suggest something is true. Now let's spend just a moment looking at some words related to our verb seem. And the first word I want to point out today is the adverb seemingly. Many times when we use this, we're describing something that's giving an impression of having a certain quality. It might also be used in a way similar to the word apparently. So an example of this might be, the airline executives we spoke to aren't seemingly worried about a recession, right? So here, it's not apparent that they share this concern or this worry. Right? Now, I did want to point out one word that has the exact same pronunciation as our verb SEEM, and that's the noun SEAM. Okay? SEAM has a different meaning. It's a noun, and it generally refers to the line along which two pieces of fabric have been sewn together. This could be in a garment or some other article. So to help us, I've included a little picture here, right? And I feel like this might have been from the inside of a car, right? The upholstery, the material you might see on the seat of a car, right? And you can see these little stitch marks joining the two pieces of fabric together. So, an example of how you might hear this word in a sentence would be, can you show me how to repair this seam, right? I am not a very good seamstress, right? My ability to sew, not that great. I can do buttons, but I don't think I would be great. So I might ask someone with greater expertise in this area to show me how to best stitch and sew together that particular item. So make sure as you're writing and communicating, you're using the correct form of seam that ties to whatever it is you might be discussing. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.